fellow model railroaders out there and all of my fellow YouTube subscribers and friends alike. My name is Bobby, and I would once again like to thank each and every one of you for joining me once again for today's brand new episode of Model Train Tech, courtesy of Cherry's Texas Trains. Now, to the few of you who saw our previous episode, which also happened to be our premiere episode of this series, then you saw us testing, running, reviewing, and having quite a lot of fun with the Bachmann Spectrum Chinese SY282 Mikado steam locomotive. Now, today's model that we're looking at is a good bit less of a mouthful, but it is no less significant to me than the SY Mikado steam engine that we saw in our previous review, because the locomotive that we're going to be looking at today has a very good bit of historical and sentimental significance to this particular model railroader here, i.e. yours truly. Now, I know our previous review that we did was quite lengthy, so we're going to try to shorten this one up just a little bit here and try to make things go as smoothly, yet as quickly as possible, yet still get the message across. So, what amazing model do we have for you guys to look at today, hidden underneath this wonderful checkered green cloth that I managed to snag from the kitchen? Well, it is none other than, there it is, the Atlas Silver Series General Electric C40-8 or -840C, however you may say it, Spartan cab dressed in none other than the armor yellow, red, and gray of Union Pacific. Now, to many of you guys out there, you may be wondering what could be so specific, special, and so sentimental about an otherwise ordinary, rather plebeian-looking General Electric diesel-electric locomotive. Well, for one, the General Electric C40-8 in Union Pacific specifically was the first ever Union Pacific locomotive. I'm not talking about this particular road number, but it was the first ever Union Pacific locomotive that I actually ever laid eyes on as a young kid. And this particular engine right here was also one of the engines that helped fuel my massive passion for trains. And not only that, this is a model that I have been searching for absolutely forever. I have been searching for one of these ever since Atlas first released this locomotive way back in their very first run in the middle of 2004. It is now 2015, and I just now finally acquired at least one of the particular road numbers that Atlas released in the Union Pacific standard scheme. Now, before we go any further, I want to say a huge thank you to fellow model railroader, specifically a fellow HO scale model railroader named Andrew, otherwise known on YouTube originally as Texas Train Kid. He has now labeled his channel as Tower 26, since that's where most of his videos seem to come out of. He actually sold me this model / partially traded for it. I traded him a couple of very wonderful Kansas City Southern Bell covered hoppers by Athearn, which was part of the first run that they made of them. I since kept one for myself because I had 3 of them. And I also gave him a little bit of cash, and in return, I got this fantastic condition General Electric diesel locomotive. Now, number 9122 is actually part of the run that was made in the middle of 2009. So this is a fairly recent run of this particular locomotive here. Now, you could get the -8 from Union Pacific in a couple of different schemes. The first one was the standard scheme you see here. This is what Union Pacific originally started with. This one, I believe the General Electric -8, this particular type of engine, was bought by the Union Pacific in the late 1980s / early 1990s. They'd been around for a while, but the first time I can really remember seeing these things in force, not really in real life, was thanks to a video that one of my parents bought for me, which was the Blue Mountains Volume 2, LeGrand to Hinkle by Video Rails, talking about Union Pacific and their fight through the mountains of Oregon, which was just amazing. The scenery on that video was incredible, and it has 2 volumes. As I said, I had Volume 2 on VHS, and I've also seen Volume 1, so I have seen the complete collection. And if you want to check out any sort of mountainous video featuring Union Pacific, then I would definitely recommend that one as well. But again, the real significance of this particular engine is that this was the first ever Union Pacific locomotive that I ever laid eyes on. Now, when I say laid eyes on, keep in mind I grew up in the wilds of Northern California, so that means that there was a lot of railroad action around where I lived. I lived in a little town called Discovery Bay, and it actually is about an hour away from San Jose, California, and it is only maybe about 15 or 20 minutes away from Stockton, California, which is a major Union Pacific, what is now BNSF, and what was originally Santa Fe, Rio Grande, Union Pacific, and Southern Pacific, I believe. I may have said it twice, but anyways, UP was one of the major railroads that ran out in the area where I originally used to live. And as a child, growing up, I saw a lot of the railroads, and they are the railroads that are modern today, which were the ones I just mentioned. So to kind of reiterate, DRGW, Santa Fe, Union Pacific, Southern Pacific, and even a little bit of Chicago Northwestern, which is why I bought one of their engines recently, and you'll see that probably in a future episode sometime later on. But for now, let's go ahead and take a look at what makes the Atlas Silver Series General Electric Standard Cab C40-8 so special. So just like any good model railroad review, we're going to first look at the packaging, and one of the things I can say about Atlas's packaging in particular is that their packaging is simply unmistakable. You cannot find packaging like this anywhere else. And I'm not saying the particular layout of it with plastic underneath with a small sheet for a box on top or anything like that. I'm talking about the overall color and design scheme of the packaging. Now, Atlas released the General Electric C40-8 in a couple different variants. This is the Silver Series, which means it is DCC ready and can possibly come equipped with a standard decoder. This one here, as you can see by the labeling on the bottom, this one is DCC ready, so I will have to install a decoder in this one somewhere in the future. They also offered these locomotives in both standard and wide cab versions, not only as the Silver Series, but they offered it as their Master Gold Series, which means that it came with digital command control, or DCC, and sound. So therefore, you could get this engine in a couple of different price ranges. This one here, if I remember correctly, MSRP on these from Atlas themselves was around $140. Andrew picked this one up on eBay for less than $130, which was awesome, but that included shipping and everything. And this thing is so rare, Andrew had to buy it from Australia. I'm not joking. You can ask him yourself. Go on his YouTube channel. He didn't make a video on this one because he wanted to see if I wanted to buy it first before making a video on it. But literally, he went on eBay, and this was the only one that he had that he could find, rather, that was not in the pretty much god-awful baby wings scheme, which means that UP lowered the gray here up on the top of the engine to make room for the lightning bolt scheme, and then put the wings on the front of the engine like they have on so many of their other modern engines. But this one here is in the standard scheme, which is great. But again, that's what makes it so rare. But again, back to the packaging on this locomotive here, it's really, I mean, again, it's just so recognizable, and I'll go ahead and show you guys the part numbers and everything like that if it'll come into focus here. There's the item number. You can see there's the locomotive, the railroad, and of course the road number, and it also says that it is a under trademark license with the Union Pacific Railroad Company. Now, the packaging itself, whoa, that was a big blur. The packaging itself is really rather basic. You have a sleeve here on the top of the box, which, as you can see, it has no plastic or anything underneath it. Very easy to recognize, as I said, with all of these like stencils all over the outside. And this is just for the Silver Series. If you get the Gold Series, I think it's a little bit of a different box. I think it's a gold background compared to the silver. But anyways, as you can see here on the side, this is basically what it is. It says the enclosed Atlas Master Locomotive, represents the height of model railroad design and technology. Each unit features exquisite craftsmanship, smooth performance, and museum-quality details. For more information on all of Atlas's high-quality products, including track, rolling stock, and accessories, please visit atlasrr.com. Of course, that's the website, so there's a little plug for you, Atlas. You guys are awesome. And one of the reasons that I think Atlas is so awesome is that although there are many other or at least a couple of other model railroad suppliers or manufacturers that have made this particular locomotive, this one here has to be hands down the one that has nailed it the best as far as details from the actual prototype. The numbers are the correct size, the lettering of Union Pacific is the correct size, just the details and everything are spot on. I know Bachmann in their Spectrum line made one of these, but the numbers were too small on the cab, the lettering was way too off-center, it just looked absolutely terrible. And then even Overland Models had a crack at making a brass version of one of these, and that totally turned into a flop. I've seen them before and they just look absolutely terrible. But as far as the definition of the color, the size of the letters and the numbers and everything, and just all of the details are absolutely spot on. So definitely a big plus to Atlas for making the best detailed version of this particular locomotive. Now, to finish off the packaging, you of course have just the box that it's all contained in, and then of course you have this little plastic cover. Now that fits over the top of the engine, and then like I said, the top of the box, i.e. kind of a sleeve, that just fits right down over the top of it like that. So we'll take the box top off, we'll take this off, and let's go ahead and take this beautiful engine out of the box, and let's see what she looks like just on her own. Alright everybody, so now that we've got this, what I can only describe as a fantastically breathtaking diesel locomotive out of its packaging, thrown the box aside, and actually gotten this thing out into the open light, I'm just simply taken aback time and time again. I mean, I've only had this engine for a short period of time, and I've taken it out of its box more times than one can possibly imagine, because I just can't stop admiring all of the details. And every time I see this engine, even if it's just sitting there in its box staring back at me from a shelf, all of the memories just seem to keep coming back. I just keep having these times where I think back to when I was 4 and 5 years old, seeing lash-ups of like 4 and 5 of these just roaring past the curve near Discovery Bay, California, where I used to live, with all kinds of different freight loads in tow. And again, just the memories are all there, and I just think it was so worth it to trade a couple of freight cars that I had, plus a little bit of my hard-earned cash, to finally have the one locomotive that I've been searching for so many years. And I mean, this outdoes any locomotive that I've been searching for. I don't care how rare it is. I have been searching for this one in particular for close to a decade now, which I just think is amazing. Now, like any good model railroad review, and it doesn't matter who you watch, whether it's another YouTuber or myself, the first thing I want to do when examining this model is just look at it as a whole. Before you start focusing on all of the little bitty details and taking it in one piece at a time, just look at the model as a whole. Does it really look as close to the prototype as possible? And the answer with this model is, of course, a mega resounding yes. Because like I said, there are several different people that have tried to make this particular type of model, and so many people have failed at it completely. Again, Overland Models, Bachmann Spectrum, those are the two main ones that I can think of that have made a model like this, and they still did not even come close to nailing the prototypical look that Atlas has managed to secure with this particular locomotive here. Now, pretty much any and all of the Union Pacific C40-8s, with the exception of the baby wings scheme, which was number 9091, which is the most common one that I've seen for sale nowadays. Really, all of the other ones look exactly like this. You really aren't going to find too many with the wings up here on the nose, and we'll get to that a little bit more in detail here in just a second. But overall, I can tell you this thing absolutely nails it as far as a prototypical look. Now, of course, this is how the locomotive would look brand new. Nowadays, here in the cold light of 2015, a lot of these have either been sold to a leasing company, most notably CREX or City Rail Corp, I believe, has a bunch of these as leasers, and I've only seen at least 2 of them that have not been sent off to another railroad to be repainted and have actually retained their Union Pacific paint scheme. The most recent one was number 9249. That was the one that was featured in my channel's introduction. If you go back and watch that video, you also see the locomotive being pulled by another one, and it was just covered in graffiti. But again, the overall level of detail on this thing is as close to the prototype as you are going to get. So, being the fact that we've looked at it as a whole, let's get a little bit up close and personal and see what makes this engine such a special purchase. Alright, so the first place that we're going to start looking at this locomotive in detail is, of course, right here at the front. Looking at the cab, the front of the trucks, and mainly down here at the plow, where I've noticed a lot of modelers, not just on this particular engine, but on a lot of different models out there, have kind of skimped on pieces of detail. Either that or they've casted them in and they really don't look as prototypical as they should. But on this Atlas General Electric diesel here, they have really nailed down the details. I mean, down to the T. And really, for starters, the shape of this engine is absolutely unmistakable, with that real squared off nose, the flat face up here at the top. You just couldn't miss it, could you? I mean, even if somebody planted one of these things in front of you, it is pretty much obvious that this was the standard cab, or Spartan cab as many people called it, General Electric Dash 8. Now, of course, they made the Dash 8 in two variants. You could get one with a wide cab, or you could get it like you see here. And Union Pacific was not the only railroad to get these. I mean, these have been used on every Class 1 and even a lot of fallen flags nowadays, from Union Pacific to Conrail to Chicago Northwestern. All sorts of railroads out there have used this particular type of locomotive in one form or another. But as far as detail goes, looking down here, the plow is dead accurate. You, of course, have the MU cables hanging down through the front. Very rare to find those on a lot of HO scale models out there. Prototypical knuckle coupler. You've got the prototypical airlines here. This, of course, in its current position on the model would show that it is a powered unit. You also have the accurately painted and detailed drawbar. One thing I would say is a little bit kind of precariously perched are these handrails. They are very, very flimsy. They're quite easy to bend and therefore very easily breakable. So you might want to do something to kind of fix this should you buy one of these models. But again, little details like the little light that's way down here at the very bottom of the nose, just underneath the standard Union Pacific shield here, which, by the way, that is also dead accurate. Again, if this was the baby wing scheme, it would have the modern-day Union Pacific wings going across the upper portion of the nose, and to me that just looks dead ugly. I love the classic design with the shield here. But again, the little light down at the bottom, that does not illuminate. You probably could make it functional. But then moving up to the top, you of course have separately applied detail up here on the top of the nose, and you'll see it better when we go on the top of the engine so you can see the rest of it. But then of course you have these bright white double lights up here between the accurately detailed number boards as well. Down here on the front, just in front of the cab, you of course have accurately painted handrails, and then of course you also have General Electric's builder's plate right here on the front of the engine. So again, little things like that actually matter on a model like this. And to think that this isn't even the top of the line, this isn't something that a person would go out and pay $300, $400, $500, $600 for. This is a model that costs less than $160, brand new, and yet it has this level of detail. It's amazing the value for money you can get, especially with models like Atlas. So again, another plus in my book for Atlas. Atlas is getting a lot of credit for this one, and I really got to say they have really outdone themselves on this model here. Up here, just aside from the numbers, again, the numbers are dead accurate as far as the size goes. You of course have another little UP shield back here. The windows are plastic. They don't slide or anything like that, but also I'll show you here in just a bit, there is actually a little guy that is sitting on the engineer's side of this locomotive that that actually looks like he's blowing the air horn, which is a pretty nice little touch. Again, sunshades up top, and then the crispness of the paintwork on this thing is just immaculate. There's no overspray. There's no kind of half-assery done here. This was done absolutely to perfection. It just looks absolutely incredible. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and put this thing to the side, or at least show you the side of this engine where you can really get an idea of how much detail Atlas has actually put into this model. So coming around to the side of this General Electric Dash 8, you can really tell that Atlas went back to the drawing board and took a real up-close look at the prototype drawings for this particular locomotive, because the shape, the characteristics, the details, and everything match identical to that of the prototype of not only 9122 that you see here, but of any General Electric Dash 8 that is out there running the rails as of nowadays. We'll get a little bit of a more up-close look here at the trucks here in just a second, but just the overall shape of the engine is just timeless. I mean, again, you couldn't miss it even if you tried. One kind of big characteristic of General Electric's, looking up here at the top, is this sort of hump right here. It comes up and then it drops before you get to things like the air horn, the exhaust, and then the radiator cover and stuff way back here. This is, of course, I think this is where the turbine and stuff resides, is here in the front of the engine. I'm not too familiar with how the real ones work, like what vents go exactly where, but I do know, speaking of vents, that it's great that they blacked out a couple of these. You could take some weathering powder, put it around, say this maybe, this vent here, and of course the real dirty areas that are like back here make these black and everything else under the sun. But again, as far as the Union Pacific scheme in particular, this one just hands down looks absolutely incredible. And even though the lighting in the room here is a little bit dimmer than would normally be, this yellow here, this armor yellow that is standard on any UP engine that you'll find nowadays, is dead on accurate. It is as dark as a normal UP engine would be, but it's not super bright. It's not screaming canary yellow like a lot of other model railroad companies use nowadays. It seems like they either go too bright, too dark, or they nail it right in the middle like what Atlas did. Like I said, Atlas has the only General Electric Dash 8 in Union Pacific that actually nailed it spot on. I mean, detail absolutely perfect. Looking down low, of course, the fuel tank is going to be well detailed. You, of course, have like the fuel shutoff valves and stuff like that. Again, the only thing I would criticize is that the handrails can be a bit flimsy. They are plastic. However, they are separately applied, which is nice. Again, up here, we'll just look one more time at the cab. I cannot get over how great the numbers look. Just the crispness of the lettering and everything like that looks absolutely fantastic. Details like the air horn. The air horn does seem to be a little bit on the small side for me. It was something for standard for Atlas, but I'll probably be ordering a different one to make it look a little bit more prototypical to the standard one. But as far as everything else, the paintwork, the crispness of the detail and everything like that is incredible. And actually, if we move this just a hair closer to this engine, and hopefully this will focus, these little white things here, you may be wondering what those are. Those are actually warning decals or warning signs that would be on the normal engine that are talking about things such as, you know, don't get too close, this is where this is where that is. You know, warnings closer to the front of the engine, like right here. These are like fuel warnings, what to do in case of an emergency, so on and so forth. Now, before we go around to the back of the engine, let's take a little bit more of an up-close and personal look at the trucks of this engine and what actually makes this thing roll. So here we are at the front of this engine one more time, just for a very, very brief look at the trucks of this diesel engine here. This, of course, being the 840C, that means this was the 6-axle variant of General Electric's Dash 8. If this were a Dash 840B, that would mean that it would be a 4-axle diesel. That means that these would be a bit shorter, you'd have a good bit more space under here, and that would mean there's only 2 axles per truck versus 3 axles per truck, like what's on this one here. Now, these trucks were synonymous with the Dash 840C and CW, so no matter which engine you look at, whether it's a standard cab or a wide cab, you are going to see these particular trucks here. And one thing that is not quite apparent in the lighting here, but there's actually a little bell way back in there. You don't see too many models that actually include the locomotive's bell tucked way back there right on the front of the fuel tank. But as far as the details themselves go, you of course have the axle ends right here. You of course have their appropriate covers and things like that. And the same can be said for the rear. There's an additional one of these axle ends or openings on this part of it. So really they don't change too much from the front to the back of the engine. So really not too much to look at there. You of course have separately applied brake parts, the little wire here, which does flex a bit because it's made of plastic and it does jiggle around a good bit. Other than that, it's really not too shabby of a of a actual, it's not too shabby of a piece, but I mean, it's a little flimsy, so it does tend to be a more breakable part, especially considering the fact that this engine was made for ages like 14 and up. So good thing on Atlas for labeling it as an engine that needs to be taken care of by much older children versus the younger crowd out there. But anyway, so that concludes a better look at the standard trucks on this diesel. So now let's take a look at the rear end of this thing and get on with the rest of the review. Alrighty, so here we are at the back side of this particular diesel locomotive here. And one thing that immediately strikes me off the bat is, again, the level of detail, but the level of paying attention to the actual prototype of this diesel that just makes this Atlas model so darn special. One thing that I can point out that is very specific to the Union Pacific paint scheme is the location of the numbers on the rear of this engine here. Of course, this one being 9122, you of course see 9122 in two different places on the top of the fins here at the back of this diesel engine. If this were an EMD or electromotive division diesel, Union Pacific has their numbers normally across the middle of the back of this diesel engine. So typical placement for the numbers on this engine, and again for Atlas, very close to the prototype, or dead on to the prototype as a matter of fact. Other applied details you can see, you've got separately applied grab irons here that go down the back of the hood, as they call it, because of course the prime mover's over in here, so this would technically be considered the hood of this diesel engine. The only thing I can criticize here on the back of this engine is of course the flimsy plastic handrails. As a matter of fact, one of them actually separated during the first handling of this engine. I don't know if that was already busted or not, but it seems part of this separately applied drawbar here, which is also accurately painted to match the front, actually came apart from the handrail up here. As you can see, this one on this side of the engine is fully connected, so all it needs is just a little bit of a touch-up and snapped right back into place, and shouldn't be an issue at all. But speaking of additional details, you of course have the separately applied MU cables, which of course this red one here is what would be connected between the engines. Then of course you have these three MU cables down here at the bottom on each end, and of course the separately applied air hose. So again, the level of detail on this thing is just second to none, and I really give Atlas a mega round of applause for all of the level of detail that they put into this thing, because it just looks absolutely incredible. I have no complaints about this thing whatsoever, primarily because of the fact that I even got the damn thing in the first place, but also because of the fact that Atlas just knocked out the details completely out of the park. They just nailed it with this one, and they seem to do that with all of their engines nowadays. Pretty much all of their modern ones just look absolutely exquisite. It doesn't matter what type of engine you have, whether it's old school or new school or even somewhat old school like this one here, it just looks absolutely amazing. So thank you so much Atlas for providing all of us HO scale model railroaders with exquisite models of all of our favorite diesels and other engines. So now really the only thing left to do is to go up top, take a quick look at it, and we'll go ahead and go from there. So let's see what the top of this engine looks like. So looking at the topmost portion of this engine, and this is a view that some people might have, especially someone who would rather look down at an HO scale model train moving by rather than looking at it maybe from eye level or something like that. And really, this GE-8 really doesn't have too much in the way of detail aside from all the other awesome prototypical stuff that's on this engine already. You've got some cast-in grill detail here at the back. Again, you could use a little bit of black weathering powder, make that look a little bit more gungy. You of course have the prototypical 3-chime air horn, but to me, one of the last criticisms that I will say for Atlas, maybe it's just something they can improve on in the future, not too much of a big deal, is actually the size of the air horn. To me, it looks a little bit small, looks a little bit flimsy. Maybe if the air horns, the two front bells of the air horn weren't so far apart, it would look a little bit better, maybe a little bit more prototypical. But really, that's the least of my worries. I would say probably the bigger of my worries is the fragile handrails on this thing. But aside from the air horn, I'm probably going to order a prototypical one, by the way, and just paint it gray and make this engine look a little bit more realistic to the prototype. The only other detail that I can see, aside from the exhaust stack here at the back, which looks a little bit wide in terms of its actual size. Maybe if it was a little bit smaller, it would look closer to an actual Dash 840C, but nevertheless, that's not too much to complain about either. This whole engine just looks amazing from every angle that you look at it, and it looks so realistic that little details like that really just don't piss too many people off. It certainly wouldn't piss me off, especially the fact that I even have this damn thing, as I said before. The only other detail that you'll see on the roof here, aside from the molded in lines and stuff for where all the separate pieces of this engine would be, is of course the fan grills up here in the front. I think these were for air conditioning or something like that. Then of course you also have the flat radio antenna up here on the top. And last but not least, if this engine were from a different railroad, such as Conrail or maybe Chicago Northwestern, you may have a little bit of a strobe light up here on the front, but I don't think that any of the 6-axle GE-8s actually came with a strobe for Union Pacific, so that is a detail that was not included for the UP version of this engine. Now really the only other thing that's left to do is to turn this engine upside down and take a look at what makes this thing run. Unlike our previous review, however, we're not going to be including the running clips in this one because we have other uses for this engine before we show you how this thing runs. Like you may have seen in our channel's introduction, you saw that we will also be offering how-tos on how to do some of the simple things, particularly for beginners of HO scale model railroading. And the one thing I can think of no better place to start is how to install digital command control, or DCC, very easily in a locomotive like this. This is what they call a plug-and-play locomotive, meaning that there's already a socket built in to the motherboard inside of this engine where you can simply plug in an otherwise ordinary DCC decoder, maybe even something with sound, but we're not going to get into that just yet. Just basically a plug it in, program it, and go. That's as easy as it's going to be, and we are going to show you how to program it as well using a very simple programming system via a computer thanks to Northwest Crossing Operating Model Railroading Club. So, aside from all that we just said, let's go ahead and turn this baby over, and lastly, take a look at what makes this engine run. Alright, so now we're looking at one of the trucks on this engine. Specifically, this is the front-powered truck on this particular diesel engine. And again, there's really not too much to see. You're not going to be looking at this unless you're maybe taking this engine apart, doing something with it, taking a look at it for any other reasons other than just maybe inspecting it right out of the box. First things first, of course, you can see all of the trucks here, or at least the side of the trucks. Those are all molded in detail. They're not really anything special. It's not like these are all going to be separate little pieces put together. It's all just one big molded piece that connects to the main source of power, which is the drive motors inside each of these. I believe it's one solid flywheel motor that's inside of this thing, so really not too much in the way of pulling power. You may have to lash a couple of these together to get some pretty hefty motive traction for a rather good-sized freight train that these things would normally be seen hauling. As you can see off to the side, though, the fuel tank is made up of two different parts here. You could actually split this open and just take the fuel tank straight off, maybe to get access to the shell. If you want to take it off, which you can easily do just by taking the screws out of each of these little parts here, take the couplers out, and that will give you a little bit better access to sliding the shell of this engine off, get better access to the motor, and things like that. Anyways, again, there's really not too much down here in terms of detail, and again, you can see the little bell. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but you can see it just up there right at the tip of my little pointer here. So again, really not too huge in terms of detail on the bottom of the engine, but then again, it's always worth seeing what makes this thing actually roll. And as you can see, there is not a mark on any of these wheels, so even though this engine was bought in Australia, this thing actually does not look as if it's been run, so that is a definite plus. So we will have to break her in at the Model Railroad Club. So anyways, let's go ahead and cut away to our final shot, which would be our overall thoughts. Alrighty guys, so now it's time for that part of the review where we sort of wrap things up. We give our final thoughts, remarks, say our thanks to anybody that has helped us with this review, and so on and so forth, and really bring this review of this fantastic diesel locomotive to an official close. And first things first, I have to give a massive round of applause once again to Atlas Model Railroad Company. You guys knocked it out of the park with this particular locomotive here. And not only that, you created an engine that, albeit so many people probably have seen in their own time period, I have seen this engine very few times, but it is such a treat to finally be able to get my hands on such an amazing model. Just the details, the way everything is put together, heck, even the way I've heard this thing run so far. I've heard it run on DC. I can't wait to see how it runs on DCC. Just everything about this model is absolutely incredible. Just the level of detail is phenomenal. You guys really paid attention to how the scheme is supposed to look, especially for Union Pacific. It's a scheme that's not exactly the easiest thing to nail down, but then again, it's not the hardest, but it is important sometimes to nail down the prototypical details. And everything from the numbers to the letters to the quality of the paint, everything is just amazing. Now, if you are the type of person who wants to buy a model like this, well, all I can say is good luck. If you want one that is not quite as popular as the one I have here, go look for one with the baby wings on it. You will probably get a much better deal on those, and you will probably find them a little more commonly. They were the ones that were not the most well-received or well-liked version of the Dash 8 that you can find out there. But if you want to find one that's like this, well, for one, you're not getting this one because I'm keeping this thing for as long as I live and may even pass it on to my kids. I don't know if I ever have any. But if you really want to find one, do some real hardcore searching, because you're going to be hard-pressed to find one of these for anything less than, I would probably guess, between $120 and $150. You'll probably pay close to, if not right at, original Atlas MSRP for this engine, which I just think is absolutely amazing value. I mean, just value for money wise, I would say it's definitely worth it to have a locomotive that A, is not made anymore, and B, is getting even rarer to see on even the real railroads out there, let alone model railroads these days. I mean, I've searched model railroad clubs all over the place, and I have yet to find somebody who has got a whole string of these lashed together. So again, just a huge thanks to Atlas for making such a wonderful model. Again, a huge thanks to Andrew, the fellow HO scale model railroader who sold me / traded me for this model, and a thanks to all of you for sticking around for yet another episode of Model Train Tech. Now be sure to stay tuned for more videos coming on this particular engine here. As I said, we will be using it to install DCC as a bit of a tutorial, and then we will also include a separate running video showing this locomotive doing what it does best, hauling some big ass trains. So again guys, this has been Bobby for Cherry's Texas Trains and another brand new episode of Model Train Tech. Again, be sure to stay tuned for many more reviews, because there is a lot more in the HO scale model railroading world to cover, and we will be certainly getting more in depth, not only with more locomotives in the future, but we will also be including things such as freight cars and HO scale accessories alongside all of our other amazing HO scale video collection. So guys, again, thank you for joining me here for this awesome review, and again, thanks to everybody who has helped make this review possible. Take care, everybody. Keep the railroading hobby alive, and I will see you all next time.